I was about to sleep when my phone lit up with a message from my father. His texts were usually short, never more than a few words, but this one was different. It was longer than usual, and as I read it, my stomach twisted. "We need to talk about the land. It's better if it's in your brother's name." I sat up in bed, staring at the screen. My land. The piece of land my grandfather had promised me. The land I had spent years taking care of. The land I had dreamed of building my future on. And now, just like that, my father had decided it wasn't mine anymore. No explanation, no discussion, just a simple message, as if it meant nothing. My hands trembled as I typed back. "What do you mean? That land belongs to me." He read the message. I saw the seen notification, but he didn't reply. Minutes passed. I stared at my screen, waiting, my mind racing. I couldn't sleep after that. I kept thinking back to the times my father had reassured me that the land would be mine, the times he told me that it was my responsibility to maintain it. I had believed him. I had trusted him. But now, I wasn't sure if I ever should have. The next morning, I called him. The phone rang longer than usual before he finally picked up. "Dad, what's going on?" My voice was calm, but my heart pounded. He sighed, as if he had been expecting this call but didn't want to have it. "It's just better this way," he said. "Your brother needs it more." I clenched my jaw. "What do you mean he needs it more? That land is mine. Grandpa left it for me." There was silence on the other end. Then, in a voice that was too casual for what he was saying, my father replied, "Things change. You're doing fine on your own. Your brother, well, he needs more support." I almost laughed. My brother needed more support? He had been handed everything his entire life. Every time he messed up, my parents bailed him out. Every time he failed, they gave him another chance. But I had worked for everything. I had never asked for help, never expected anything to be given to me. And now, because of that, I was being pushed aside? "I'm not agreeing to this," I said firmly. "That land is mine." "It's done," my father said, and this time there was no hesitation in his voice. "The papers have already been signed." The breath left my lungs. My head spun. "What do you mean the papers have been signed? That's impossible." "I transferred it to your brother," he said. "It's official." I gripped the phone tighter, feeling my fingers go numb. "You didn't have the right to do that." "It's what's best," he said. And before I could say another word, he hung up. I sat there in silence, my whole body shaking. My land, gone. Given away without my permission, without a conversation, without a warning. I wanted to scream, to break something, to march over to my father's house and demand an explanation. But then, something clicked in my mind. A small detail, something I had nearly forgotten. The real deed. The one I had kept hidden away. If my father thought he could take what was mine, he was about to find out just how wrong he was. I didn't rush into action. I wanted to, but I knew better than to act out of anger. Instead, I took a deep breath, got out of bed, and walked straight to my closet. Buried beneath a stack of old papers, inside a locked metal box, was the original deed. The real one, with my name on it. I had kept it safe ever since my grandfather had handed it to me years ago, telling me, "No matter what happens, this land is yours." At the time, I didn't understand why he had said that with such seriousness. But now, I did. Maybe he had seen this coming. Maybe he had known my father would try something like this. I pulled out the document, my hands shaking as I ran my fingers over my name, printed clearly on the official papers. It was still mine. Legally, my father's transfer was worthless. He either didn't know I had this copy, or he thought I had lost it. Either way, he had made a mistake. A big one. But I didn't say anything yet. I wanted to know exactly what was happening before I made my move. So, I stayed quiet, and started watching. A few days later, my suspicions were confirmed. I was at a family gathering, one I hadn't planned on attending, but I needed to be there. My brother was standing in the corner, a drink in his hand, laughing with some relatives. I hadn't spoken to him since I found out about the land, but I had a feeling he knew. I walked up to him casually, pretending I didn't already know what was going on. "So," I said, crossing my arms, "I hear you're getting some new property." His smirk was instant. "Yeah," he said, sipping his drink like it was nothing. "Dad finally came around. He realized it makes more sense for me to have it." I forced myself to stay calm. "And what exactly makes more sense about that?" He shrugged. "You don't need it. You have a stable life, a place to live. I could really use the land. You know? For my future." I clenched my fists at his arrogance. He wasn't even trying to deny it. He knew what they had done, and he didn't care. "Must be nice," I said, keeping my voice steady, "having everything handed to you." He laughed. "Come on, don't be like that. It's just land." Just land. The thing I had worked for, cared for, planned my future around, was just land to him. I wanted to tell him right then and there that the deed he held was meaningless, that his claim over the land was an illusion. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I nodded, pretending to accept it. "Yeah," I said. "I guess it is." That night, as I lay in bed, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about land anymore. This was about everything. Every time I had been pushed aside. Every time I had been expected to just accept less. Every time my father had chosen my brother over me. This time, I wasn't going to let it go. They thought they had won. They had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I woke up with a clear plan. I wasn't just going to take back what was mine. I was going to make sure they never tried to take anything from me again. But first, I needed information. I spent the day making calls, starting with my lawyer. "Can my father legally transfer the land if I hold the original deed?" I asked, gripping the phone tightly. There was a pause on the other end before my lawyer responded. "Not unless you signed off on it. Do you have proof of sole ownership?" I reached for the metal box, flipping open the deed and running my fingers over the seal. "I have the official document, signed by my grandfather. No other names are on it but mine." The lawyer let out a low chuckle. "Then your father's transfer is worthless. If you take this to court, it'll be overturned instantly." I exhaled, relief washing over me. They thought they had outplayed me, but they had nothing. "Do you want to file a legal claim now?" the lawyer asked. I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "Not yet," I said. "I want to see how far they're willing to go." I needed to understand just how deep this betrayal ran. Was it just my father and brother scheming together? Or did other family members know? The only way to find out was to keep pretending I was in the dark. That afternoon, I drove to my father's house. I walked in like nothing was wrong, smiling like I hadn't just spent the last 2 days planning my next move. My father greeted me with forced warmth, his eyes flickering with something. Guilt? Suspicion? "How's everything?" I asked casually, taking a seat in the living room. My father hesitated before answering. "Good, good." Then, as if testing the waters, he added, "You've been quiet lately." I smiled. "Just been thinking." "About what?" I shrugged. "The land, mostly." The room went silent. My father's face tensed just slightly, but my brother, who had just walked in, was less subtle. He stiffened at my words, shifting uncomfortably before forcing a smirk. "Still hung up on that?" he said, chuckling like it was a joke. I met his gaze. "A little." He sat down across from me, looking too comfortable, too confident. "You know, it's not a big deal," he said, stretching his arms lazily. "Dad just made the best decision for the family." "The best decision for the family," I repeated, tilting my head. And what about me? I'm not part of this family? My father sighed, rubbing his temples. You'll always be part of the family, he said. But your brother needs it more. He has plans. I almost laughed. Plans? Since when had my brother planned anything? He had never worked for anything in his life. But now, suddenly, he was an ambitious man with big dreams. Instead of arguing, I nodded slowly. I see. And just like that, they relaxed. My father leaned back, relieved. My brother smirked again, thinking I had given up. They had no idea that in my hands, tucked safely away, was the proof that would tear their little scheme apart. I wasn't going to fight them with words. I was going to destroy them with the truth. For the next few days, I played my role perfectly. I acted indifferent, as if I had accepted my father's decision. I let my brother gloat, let my father believe he had control. I knew that if I pushed too soon, they would find a way to cover their tracks, and I wasn't going to give them that chance. I wanted them to feel safe in their lies before I pulled the ground from under them. Then, one evening, I got the proof I was waiting for. I had just finished work when I got a message from a distant cousin, someone I hadn't spoken to in a while. Hey, I heard about the land situation. Your dad really did you dirty. My stomach tightened. People were talking. I replied quickly. What do you mean? A few moments later, a voice note came through. I pressed play, and my cousin's voice filled the room. Your dad's been telling everyone that he took the land from you because you didn't deserve it. That you wouldn't use it properly, and that it would be wasted in your hands. He said it was never meant for you in the first place. That Grandpa made a mistake. I felt a slow, burning anger settle inside me. So that was their excuse? That I didn't deserve what was already mine? The worst part was, people believed it. My father was respected in the community. If he told a story enough times, people would accept it as fact. And I had let him run his mouth freely, thinking I wouldn't fight back. I exhaled, forcing myself to stay calm. I had proof of ownership. My father had nothing but lies. But lies, if left unchecked, could spread like wildfire. It was time to make my move. I called my lawyer again, this time ready to act. File the claim, I said. Let's make it official. You're sure? He asked. I smirked. More than sure. After the call, I sent one message to my father. We need to talk, face to face. Within minutes, he replied. Come by tomorrow. Perfect. By the time I walked into his house, everything would already be in motion. The next day, I drove to my father's house with my heart pounding. But my mind was clear. I wasn't here to argue. I wasn't here to beg. I was here to end this. By the time I stepped out of my car, my lawyer had already filed the legal claim. The courts would recognize my ownership within days. My father and brother just didn't know it yet. I walked through the front door without knocking. My father and brother were already seated in the living room, their expressions unreadable. My father looked calm, as if he had convinced himself I was here to finally accept his decision. My brother, on the other hand, leaned back in his chair, smirking like he had already won. I took my time, scanning the room, making them wait. Then, I spoke. So, I hear you've been telling people I don't deserve my land. My father's jaw tightened for just a second before he put on that fake, patient voice he always used when he thought he was in control. It's not like that, he said. I only said that your brother would make better use of it. I scoffed. Better use of it? He's never worked a day in his life. My brother laughed, shaking his head. Oh, come on. You're being dramatic. It's just land. There it was again. Just land. I tilted my head, keeping my expression neutral. If it's just land, why do you want it so badly? My brother's smirk faltered for just a second, but my father cut in quickly. Look, he said, his voice turning firmer. This is already done. The papers have been signed. You need to let it go. I reached into my bag, my fingers brushing against the real deed, the one with my name on it. I could have pulled it out right then and ended this, but instead, I leaned back and smiled. You know what's funny? I said. You keep saying the papers are signed, like that means anything. My father narrowed his eyes. It does mean something. I nodded slowly. Sure, if you were actually the legal owner of the land in the first place. Silence. For the first time since I had walked in, I saw something flicker in my father's eyes. Doubt. I let the moment hang before continuing, my voice calm but sharp. Dad, tell me something. When you transferred the land to my brother, did you check to see if you actually had the legal right to do it? His face paled slightly. My brother sat up straighter. What are you talking about? My father said, but I could hear the shift in his tone. I reached into my bag, pulled out the deed, and placed it on the table between us. The room went dead silent. My father stared at it. My brother's mouth opened slightly, then shut. Neither of them moved. I tapped my finger on the paper. This is the original deed, I said, slowly and deliberately. The one with my name on it. Grandpa never put your name on it, Dad. It was never yours to give away. My brother shot up from his chair. That's not possible. Dad said a lot of things, I interrupted, turning to face him. But the law doesn't care about what Dad said. This is a legal document, signed and recorded. Your so-called transfer is meaningless. My father opened his mouth, but no words came out. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. And just so you know, I've already filed a legal claim. So, in a few days, the court will officially confirm what this document already says. I sat back, watching the realization dawn on them. They had thought they could take from me without consequences. They had just learned how wrong they were. The weight of my words settled over the room like a heavy fog. My father stared at the deed, his face draining of color. My brother, usually so smug and full of himself, looked like he had been punched in the gut. He turned to my father, his voice sharp with panic. Tell me this isn't real, he said. My father didn't answer. He was still frozen, his hands gripping the arms of his chair as if he needed to hold on to something solid. I leaned back, letting them process the truth. I had been quiet for too long, but now they had no choice but to listen. Finally, my father found his voice, though it was weaker than before. This isn't right, he muttered. There has to be a way to fix this. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Fix this? You mean undo what you did? You mean steal from me all over again? My brother stepped forward, trying to recover. Listen, we're family. We can work something out. Maybe we can split the land? I turned to him, my expression blank. Split the land? I repeated, as if testing the words. You mean the land that was never yours to begin with? My father ran a hand over his face. Come on, let's not make this a bigger issue than it needs to be. My patience snapped. You already made it a big issue when you tried to erase me, I said coldly. Silence. I exhaled, forcing myself to stay in control. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing how deeply they had hurt me. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about respect. It was about years of being pushed aside, treated like I didn't matter. I stood up. I didn't come here to negotiate, I said. I came here to tell you that your little scheme is over. You thought you could take what was mine without consequences. You were wrong. My father's face hardened, his old pride trying to claw its way back. You're really willing to tear this family apart over land? I looked him dead in the eye. No, Dad. You were willing to tear this family apart when you betrayed me. I'm just making sure you don't get away with it. For the first time, my father looked afraid. Not of me, but of what this meant, of how badly he had miscalculated. I picked up the deed and put it back in my bag. The court will finalize everything soon, I said as I headed for the door. If you still think you can fight it, I suggest you get a lawyer. But we both know how that's going to end. My brother scoffed behind me. Unbelievable, he muttered. You're really doing this? I paused at the doorway and turned slightly. I should be asking you the same thing, I said. But then again, I already know the answer. And with that, I walked out, leaving them in the wreckage of their own greed. They had tried to erase me, to take what was mine, but in the end, they had only destroyed themselves. I walked out of my father's house, but the weight of everything still clung to me. This wasn't just about land. This was years of being ignored, of being treated like I was less than my brother, of always having to be the one who understood while they never bothered to understand me. This was a battle I never should have had to fight. As I drove home, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from my father, from my brother. Some were angry, calling me selfish, accusing me of destroying the family. Others were weak attempts at guilt-tripping me. My father's words were the worst. I thought you were better than this. I thought you valued family. I stared at the message for a long time before locking my phone. Did he really think I would fall for that? After everything? After the lies, the betrayal? The way he had tried to push me out like I was nothing? He was only reaching out now because he had lost, and I wasn't going to let that work on me anymore. For the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. They weren't in control of me anymore. A few days passed. The court officially confirmed the land was mine. My lawyer sent me the documents that finalized everything, making it impossible for my father or brother to challenge my ownership. It was done. And then, the silence came. After realizing they couldn't fight me legally, my father and brother stopped calling. No more messages, no more fake apologies, just silence. At first, I thought it would feel like a victory, but instead, it felt strange. I had spent my whole life trying to earn my father's approval, and now, I realized I had never needed it. I had wasted so much time chasing something that was never going to be given to me. And now, I was free from that. One night, I got a message from an aunt who had heard about everything. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. You deserve this. I didn't know how much I needed to hear those words until I saw them. For the first time, someone in the family had acknowledged what I had been through. I stared at my phone for a long time before replying, "Thank you." It was just 2 words, but somehow, it felt like the beginning of something new. I wasn't the forgotten one anymore. I wasn't the one who had to stay silent while others decided my fate. For the first time in my life, I had taken control, and I wasn't about to let that go. Weeks passed, and life started to feel normal again. Except now, I wasn't living under their shadow anymore. The land was mine, and no one could take it from me. I didn't just win a legal battle, I reclaimed my worth. At first, I expected my father to come back, maybe with another excuse, maybe with another attempt to manipulate me into seeing reason. But he didn't. Instead, there was just silence. And in that silence, I finally saw the truth. I had never really been part of his plans. If I had given up the land, he would have moved on without a second thought. That realization should have hurt, but instead, it freed me. One afternoon, I went to visit the land. The air was crisp, the ground firm beneath my feet. This wasn't just property. This was proof that I had stood up for myself. Proof that I had finally stopped waiting for their approval. My phone buzzed. A message from my father. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, debating whether to even open it. Then, curiosity won. "Dad, we should talk." That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement of what he had done. Just another command, as if he still had authority over me. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted revenge, but because I finally understood something. I didn't owe him a response. For years, I had been the one to reach out first, the one to fix things. the one to swallow my pride just to keep the peace. But I wasn't that person anymore. Instead, I put my phone back in my pocket and took a deep breath, looking out over the land that was mine. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. And that choice? That was worth more than any inheritance.